Welcome to my second lecture. So we will continue this revolutionary thematic, but with a little bit of a later time period. So we move to the 17th/18th century, and we will be a little bit more specific regarding the Kuruc movements in Central Europe. Again, an important question that everyone can see the slides, right?
Yes.
Perfect. Then we can start. So my second topic, as I mentioned, the Kuruc movements regarding their operation and existence in Central Europe and the effects and memories they left behind. The main goals and questions of my lecture this time will be the following. First of all, for those who are not that familiar with the term Kuruc and the whole Kuruc movement in Hungary, Transylvania, and in Central Europe as a whole, I would like to discuss the definition and a short history of the so-called Kuruc movements from the late 17th century. I want to present a little bit that which countries and which people were affected by this movement or chain of movements in Central Europe, what Central European connections did the movement have, and how certain contemporaries viewed the movement and the situation within Central Europe. This one will be a little bit more vague and a little bit more lighter, because that could have been a separate lecture in and of itself, but I just couldn't help myself because it's very interesting to show how some contemporary sources mention certain so-called Kuruc leaders or events in Hungary and in Central Europe. Also, why am I giving this lecture? Why I chose this topic? It is also a valid question. It is because of our recent background. So in the previous years we had, in the pre-pandemic era, we had a couple of memorial events and anniversaries. In 2018, we had the Ilonyazrínyi commemorative conference, which had Polish-Hungarian topics from the so-called Tököli era, so the late 17th century, right up to the Rákóczi period, so the early 18th century. This also contained a commemorative trip to Beregszász, Munkács, Beherova, Munkácsevo in the Ukraine, and also to Przemysl and Jaroslav in Poland, and to Zborov in modern-day Slovakia. So it was practically a Central European tour for professors, academics, and students alike, and also there were commemorations, meetings, so it was a very fruitful event, I think, for all parties involved in this Ilonyazrínyi commemorative event, which we can see the logo of the top corner. The next year, in 2019, was officially announced as Francis II Rákóczi year, because of the anniversary of Rákóczi's election to Prince of Transylvania during the Revolutionary War and War of Independence of Rákóczi. This means that nationwide there were conferences, commemorations in Hungary. There were also such commemorations in Transylvania, some modern-day Romania. There were also exhibitions that were presented here. There were also commemorations in Slovakia, especially in Košice, so Kassa, and in the surroundings. And there were also similar cultural and also academic events in Subcarpathia, so modern-day Ukraine. Again, an event that involved much part of Central Europe in and of itself in 2019. Then this was extended into, well, the first half of 2020, but then we know what happened. So later celebrations, commemorations were not then implemented, and 2020 was a Zrínyi Miklós commemorative year, so not quite the Rákóczi perspective, but yet again, Miklós Zrínyi is related to Rákóczi II if we take a look at the family tree, so the thematic kind of continued. But overall, just by looking at the 2018 and 2019 events, commemorations, conferences, publications, and everything I can mention, it shows that there is a sign of Central European cultural memory regarding both the Tököli family, both the Zrínyi heritage and both the Rákóczi heritage, not just because of the popularity, but also these areas and the nationalities living here were quite influenced by these events and these people who orchestrated these events. We also have a historical background, which is also a reason why I chose this topic. In my lectures, I try to choose the most Central European things possible, just to show a more universal aspect and just to strengthen the focus on the Collegium Carpathicum's main focus regarding the common knowledge, the common cultural background, and the coexistence of Central Europe and of the people of Central Europe. Therefore, I think it was very handy to show this topic as one of my lectures, and also because I thought that the Kuruc movement itself is very popular in Hungary. We talk about it a lot, but maybe not so much in other cases or in other countries. So I thought this could be also a little bit interesting as well, not just fitting for the main framework of the network. Now, the historical background, I would like to point out that the area, which was called for the former Upper Hungary, combined with southern Poland, is very important and a key point within this whole Kuruc framework. This area, this historical area, also is very important because in and of itself it contains modern-day northeast Hungary, Subcarpathia, East Slovakia, northwest Romania, and southern Poland. So immediately the joint cooperation can be seen here. Most of our participant countries are represented within this relatively compact historical region within Central Europe. Now, in this area, there was, just joining up for my previous lecture, a strong cultural transfer because it was a very dominant contact zone, culturally speaking, sometimes militarily speaking as well. But this functioned as a sort of Central European connecting tissue in the early modern period especially, and especially during the time period which I am referring to during this lecture. Now, this area is also home to multiple ethnicities: Hungarians, Slovaks, Ruthenians, Polish, Ukrainians, Romanians lived and live within these regions. Several confessions can be found here for hundreds of years. Catholics, different branches of Protestantism, Greek Catholics, Orthodox religion, and Jewish religion can also be seen here. So it also embodies sort of the Central Europeanness of our idea. As I mentioned, this is also a contact zone. It is a contact zone between the Habsburg dominion, the Ottoman Empire, Transylvania, and Poland, Lithuania. So places that were culturally very strong, of course, but also militarily, politically speaking, they were not on the friendliest terms for all the time. Here we can talk about the Habsburg, Polish-Lithuanian, just cold relations in the 16th, 17th century. We can talk about the Ottoman expansion in the Central European region that inflicted most of these people. We can talk about the Transylvanian conflicts and the Transylvanian offensive with Ottoman backings or without Ottoman backings, and of course the operations from Transylvania up to Poland and Lithuania. This means that the people living here built up as a militarized society during these 1.5 centuries. And also not just a militarized society lived here because of the defensive structures, because of the clashing zones, but also developed a very strong identity based on their religion, based on their confession, and later on based on their ethnicity and their nationality later on. So again, it's a very dominant part if we talk about the Central Europeanness of this topic. It became a straw base for later political movements and, as I mentioned, military and confessional movements as well. Now, a little bit more family history is that the Rákóczi estates can be located in this region. The Rákóczi estates were vast and numerous in Transylvania and Upper Hungary, and in the case southern Poland as well. This means it also functions as a sort of presence and connecting tissue. Of course, we can mention the presence of Ilona Zrínyi and Imre Tököli, key figures in this time period, which again functions as part of the so-called connecting tissue. Also, these unique features could be seen and even studied up to the 20th century that also identified this region as well. Now, before I dive into this whole Kuruc topic, I want to again mention a brief historiography, because nothing is complete without a brief historiography. Who wrote within this topic? Mostly I mention Hungarian historians and academics here. As you can see, the historiography and academic research regarding the Kuruc movements, regarding the Tököli and the Rákóczi conflicts movements go back way up to into the 19th century. Cultural memory is also very strong in the 18th and 19th century, may I add, but I will just take a look at more likely academic researches. First of all, we could not start without Kálmán Tali, who was one of the key figures in the Rákóczi research and the Kuruc researches. Kálmán Tali's work was very important because he started this whole thing. Also, we see the so-called Kuruc romanticism that is also connected to his name, but his work, the Archivum Rákóczianum, was vital within the researches of this time period. He wrote this work in 10 volumes, and he collected the correspondences between Rákóczi Ferenc and his generals and chiefs of staff. So it's a very important written source material for later academics and researchers. He also wrote in the second half of the 19th century about Imre Tököli and the diaries and memoirs of Imre Tököli and his officers. So immediately he covers this entirety, this umbrella of the Kuruc topic. And he also published, for example, works regarding generals and high-ranking officers of Rákóczi's army, such as Ocskai László in the early 20th century. Now, Kálmán Tali is very interesting because on one hand, he is a key figure within starting the academic researches of the Kuruc topic, of the Tököli era, of Rákóczi era. But on the other hand, he is a bit controversial figure within the academic sphere because later on, it was made clear that he forged some of the letters and songs and poems of the time period, which is also a matter of debate up till this day, whether or not he approached this from a literary perspective, from a poetic perspective. Therefore, it was not a forging, but of a tribute. On the other hand, this is one of the reasons why in these later works people tread with caution when they analyze Kálmán Tali's works. But of course, the Archivum Rákóczianum and all the other written sources are without a doubt key cornerstones of this topic. And then we have Béla Köpeci, also renowned academic and historian who died in 2010. He mostly researched the diplomatic relations. So, for example, the Hungarian-French relations during the Tököli and Rákóczi period. So he expands not just to research the Hungarian factors, but the, let's just say, global European factors as well. He published also the memoirs of Rákóczi Ferenc II and his political will in the 1970s and the 1980s. Also, he published in German language as well in the 1980s, and even in French language as well. So he was an important figure within the Kuruc diplomacy of the 17th and early 18th century. And of course, Ágnes Várkonyi was also a key figure in studying this time period. She passed away in 2014. One of the most important works she published was the Két Pogány Közt, between two pagans, the history of the Rákóczi War of Independence in 1968. She wrote about the childhood of the prince, so childhood of Rákóczi II. This means that she indulges not only in the Rákóczi period, but also into the Tököli period as well. And also, she also worked regarding Central Europe as well. In 2003, she published Central Europe in the Policy of Rákóczi. And also, one of her later works was also Rákóczi's War of Independence in the European content. So again, just to put it on the international level, which the Rákóczi uprising definitely was at the time. We also have several historians, again, similar, the case is similar than the other one in the military history, bibliography and historiography, because we have several works, fine works published. I will just to mention the most important ones and just mention them briefly. Sándor Gebei, again, a very renowned researcher of the time period. He has several works published about the Rákóczi and both the Tököli uprising, also not just in his Hungarian part, but also in the Polish content. So Sándor Gebei's work will be a strong part also in my lecture. One of his friends, Second Rákóczi's Polish Relations, which works he published in the 2000s, so 2003, 2011, 2012, works regarding the Polish relations. Of course, the Tököli and the Polish-Lithuanian relations were again addressed in works in the early 2000s, and of course a complete history of the Rákóczi War of Independence was published in 2009 from him. Again, he put it on the Central European international scale in this way, and also the diplomatic history is very important in his academic research. From a military history perspective, István Cigány is very important. He deals with the military history of the Tököli and the Rákóczi wars, and in general history and warfare of the early modern period. Sándor Pap mentions the diplomatic history of the time period, not just the Rákóczi War, but also Hungarian and Transylvanian Ottoman relations of the 17th century and during the Rákóczi War of Independence. So this, and from this part, the Ottoman part is very strong in this in his researches. And last, we must mention Kálmán Mészáros, so the younger generation, and he basically dives well into the military structure and the military history of the Rákóczi War, the history of the Rákóczi estates, and he publishes works regarding the officers and generals within Rákóczi's army, and also the everyday life of the people and the fates that were inflicted during the Rákóczi War of Independence. So he's very passionate about his researches of this time period. After the historiographic presentation, let's move on to our area which we'll discuss, the Upper Hungarian territory. Before the Kuruc movement, it is very interesting. Now, the Upper Hungarian area, which we can see on the slide here on the map, which we can also see with blue, it is shown the estates of the Rákóczi family, namely George Rákóczi, the first Prince of Transylvania. So immediately we can see how vast his estates were, how many estates he possessed, and the red ones are Rákóczi family estates. So the Rákóczi family is very wealthy and well known in this part of the country, not just in Transylvania, but in the Hungarian territory as well. Upper Hungary is very important because of this. It is very close, basically bordering the Principality of Transylvania, also borders Poland, Lithuania as well. It is strong in industry and mining, so it has economic and financial importance. So having the Upper Hungarian cities, mining cities, are very important when conducting campaigns between Transylvania and the Kingdom of Hungary. The eastern half of the Kingdom of Hungary, so especially the northern part, is very strong politically speaking, a very strong supporter and very close to Transylvania, because they rely on these situations. They are geographically closer to the principality. They are much more keen to leaning towards the Transylvanian policies than to the Vienna because of the geographical closeness to it. Again, a strong basis of Protestantism can be found in the settlements here, and as well as I said, the political support of the Transylvanian princes are very strong in the eastern parts of Upper Hungary. This is why these were the basis of anti-royal or anti-Habsburg movements in the 17th and 18th century as well. Not just that, because István Bocskai, Gábor Bethlen, and George Rákóczi's campaigns in the 30 Years' War period and even early on in the 17th century, they always go through the eastern part of Upper Hungary. bypassing the Ottoman areas, of course, but these territories fall under the Transylvanian prince's influence fairly early on, and without any major incidents. So in these areas they have strong support, and the peace treaties also give several counties under the Transylvanian political influence for the time being. So the grip and the influence of Transylvania is very strong here as well. And you can see Ferenc Rákóczi comes from a line of princes of Transylvania. George Rákóczi I, George Rákóczi II, and even Sigismund Rákóczi were also princes of Transylvania. So he immediately had a strong pedigree when he were born. And of course, Ferenc Rákóczi I was also elected as Prince of Transylvania. So there is a line and a shoe to fill in when he was born and he came of age. And of course, the Rákóczi estates were also a strong connecting tissue for this area as well. Immediately shows how strong this territory is, not just in Hungarian context, but in an international Central European context as well. Now, as I mentioned, I want to discuss the Kuruc movement, the basic etymology and the origins of the Kuruc movement, just to clarify what is the Kuruc, how the Kuruc as such developed in the 17th century. The etymology of the name is very interesting. It was still a matter of academic debate and a little bit of a cultural memory as well. The most popular theories where the Kuruc term derives from, one of them is more popular, is the Turkish origin, the Turkish Kuruc or Kuruci, the meaning which can be translated roughly into insurgents or raiders or something like that. Also, you have the Greek kuros word, which definitely refers to as raider. And so these are very similar words coming from the Balkanic and the Ottoman influences. But you also have a German word to this phenomenon, so-called the Huszitők, meaning the Turks with cross or cross Turks, referring to as the Christian Turks or Christians in Ottoman service. Immediately, this phrase have a very negative context, because a Christian in Ottoman service is practically a traitor to the Christian faith, a one who is serving the arch nemesis, one who is serving the Ottomans. So therefore he is an ultimate traitor, not just to the king, not just to the country, but also to Christianity and Christian Europe itself. So this term is very strong in the Habsburg and the Ottoman propaganda. And of course, the Huszitők is also one of the most popular theories. Where can the Kuruc terminology come from? Regarding the origins, the first mention can be read in around 1671 from Upper Hungary. We have Ottoman letters also mentioning the Kuruc warriors or Kuruc raiders. We also have a mentioning before this time period from Transylvania, but that is more likely referring to another context, so we do not discuss that at this time. Basically, what a Kuruc means is these people who went into hiding and revolted against the royal government, the Habsburg government, from religious issues or from political issues, or they were just dissatisfied because they were relieved and they were sacked from their previous military duties, and therefore they sought refuge in other territories and conducted these semi-regular or irregular raids and uprisings in certain areas of the Kingdom of Hungary. The first uprisings of these Kuruc movements were actually in the 1670s. This is what is mentioned by the Ottoman letters as well. It started mostly in Upper Hungary, yet again. And as I mentioned, these were mostly comprised of former soldiers, officers, peasants, members of the Protestant nobility, and they were collectively referring to themselves, and sometimes they were also referred to as the Bujdosok, which can be translated in people in hiding or the ones, the hidden ones, but people in hiding as well. Now, this series of uprisings and the strengthening of the movement was due to the aftermath of the so-called Veselényi conspiracy in the 1660s, when there was again an anti-royal conspiracy within the Hungarian nobility, and this was resulting in royal retaliations executions, confessional tensions, again, taking certain political liberties from the Hungarian nobility. So there was strong tensions between the Habsburg court and the Hungarian estates. And of course, it was again strengthened because of political, confessional, and financial tensions. So this again raises the dissatisfied nature of these people, and they start these uprisings, raidings, and revolts in the kingdom. These people, these soldiers, these Kuruc people, sought refuge and support in Ottoman territories. So they moved from northern Hungary into the Ottoman occupied territories of the Hungarian territories, former Hungarian territories, and also went into Transylvania as well, the great rival for the Catholic Habsburg dominance, and also again allied to the Ottoman Empire. So it was a reason why they sought refuge there. Here we can see on the picture Count Mihály Teleki, who was one of the first leaders and general of the Kuruc movements when it first started. So he was an important figure in the earlier periods. What did the Kuruc movement do in Transylvania? Well, mostly they sought refuge, and the Prince of Transylvania, Mihály Apafi, gave support to them, welcomed them, and because of Ottoman pressure, he also gave them political and military support and offered them a place to stay here. This means that by the late 1670s, there is a strong military cooperation between Transylvania and the Kuruc movement. And they also swore fealty to Apafi. After this, they would eventually become basically a striking force of the Transylvanian principality, which is useful for the prince and for the Ottomans as well. Here we need to mention Count Imre Thököly, who was a servant to the Prince of Transylvania and joined the Kuruc movement in 1677, and he started actually to basically use the power struggle, exploit the power struggle within the Kuruc movement, Kuruc command, up to his benefits. So he climbed the ladders fairly quickly in the commanding structure. And in the campaigns to Upper Hungary, he was a well-renowned commander at that point in the late 1670s. Even so, in 1680, Thököly will become their leader, again, using and exploiting the differences between the certain Kuruc leaders, and also having a certain support from the Transylvanian and Ottoman part was very important in his later career as well. Now, these strikings, these campaigns in the late 1670s, as mentioned, were to soften up the defenses of Upper Hungary and soften up the defenses of the Habsburg part of Hungary to prepare the Great Ottoman campaign, which we know from the early 1680s and 1683 that eventually went to attack Vienna. In 1681, we already know about an Ottoman military conspiration, let's just say, and a possible Ottoman Transylvanian Kuruc coalition was forming in 1681, which again strengthened the Kuruc movement and gave a little bit of a push to the Transylvanian cause as well. This was succeeded by 1682, a new campaign then led by Thököly. In this campaign, he captured a lot of Upper Hungarian cities at that time, so Kassa or Szádvár, Eperjes, Lőcse, Tokaj, Ónod, and Putnok, so cities that are now part of modern-day Slovakia or modern-day northern Hungary as well, so it's a larger territory that Thököly controlled in 1682. This was very good for his military career and political career, which was even more beneficial to him that he married the widow of the former elected Prince of Transylvania, Rákóczi, Ferenc Rákóczi I, Ilona Zrínyi, and they had their marriage in Munkács, so Munkácsevo, modern-day Ukraine as well. And then Thököly seized control of Rákóczi estates, Zrínyi estates, and his own estates as well. So Thököly became a very powerful figure, politically and militarily speaking, in the region. In the map, we can see most of the territories inflicted. So as you can see, the cities, towns captured by Thököly, and later on, this territory will be the one he controls for a couple of years as prince as well. Thököly was also referred to as the so-called Kuruc king because he not just he climbed the ladders of military structure, but he had a very strong political support from the Ottomans as well. At the end of the 1682 campaign, he received a berat and an adname from the Sultan, so the Porte, and these documents, these Ottoman documents, basically announce them as rulers or sort of slash kings of Hungary. So they proclaim him as ruler of Hungary in these documents. But also it means they are rulers and under Ottoman vassalage. So again, the Ottomans found this very good because they managed to not just gain control over Transylvania through a vassal state, but they also managed to expand their influence through Thököly to the Upper Hungarian realms, which means the Ottoman holding could actually strengthen in the 1680s. When we talk about the downfall of the Ottoman Empire and the liberation of Hungary, we often fail to mention that these holdings were strong before the great turning of events under the walls of Vienna. And the Ottomans were getting a very good position with the Upper Hungarian territories, but short-lived positions. Now, this means that Thököly was ruling these parts of Hungary, and also he promised the Ottomans not just a yearly payment, but also he promised to subdue the remaining territories of Hungary under the Ottoman vassalage. So, meaning he unites Hungary, which can be a good thing from a later on national perspective, but he also unites Hungary under Ottoman control and Ottoman vassalage. So, not very beneficial in the longer term, maybe, but we never know. So what ifs are not very historian-like phrases to use. This territory that Thököly used became the principality. He was also referred to as the Prince of Upper Hungary, or the territory was also called as Orta Magyar. And this is also part of the crises because the Hungary that was torn to 3 parts, now it is in 4 parts. Basically, this is the height of Thököly's power. Afterwards, because of the siege of Vienna and the Battle of Kahlenberg, which is a catastrophic defeat for the Ottomans, the positions starts to weaken in the territories, but also Thököly remains a loyal ally to the Ottomans even after 1683. This also means that he also not just suffers military defeats from the Polish-Lithuanian armies as well, and the Christian armies as well, but also isolates himself diplomatically for the Christian community. King Sobieski of Poland also wanted to negotiate certain peace treaties. Leopold I also wanted to negotiate peace treaties in the earlier years, and later King Sobieski also tried to mediate between the emperor and Thököly, but these attempts were eventually failed. Also, King Sobieski was not much of a fan of Thököly. Later on this we can know about certain contemporary sources which also reflect the Polish king's very strong language he also used against Thököly as well. The relations were not also fruitful because of certain events that happened in the Transylvanian and the eastern parts, because reports suggest that Polish-Lithuanian detachment also came through Thököly estates and they raided that territory. So Thököly immediately became more hostile towards the Polish-Lithuanian troops as well, and towards Sobieski as well. This means that he is basically kept in this Ottoman alliance later on. And by 1685, the Orta Magyar basically crumbles, ceases to exist. So it was a short-lived rulership of only a couple of years, 3 years to be exact. In the same year, he was arrested by the Ottomans because of his defeats, and also, the siege of Munkács happened by the Christian forces, which endured up till 1688. So even Iroda Zrínyi suffered the consequences of Thököly's Ottoman alliance. He could return briefly in 1690 because he was elected as Prince of Transylvania for 1 month. But again, it was a short-lived and weak enterprise from him with the Ottomans losing on major fronts. So he withdrew later on, and he remained in the Ottoman Empire up to his death in 1705. He remained in the Ottoman exile with a couple of his a number of his officers and soldiers once more. This will become interesting and important later on. I mentioned contemporary sources. One of these contemporary sources are, for example, Sir Paul Rajko, who was an English person. He spent a lot of time as a diplomat in the Ottoman Empire, and also he was a diplomat in Hamburg at the later years. He wrote the History of the Turks, which he published in 1700. It is very important because he focuses a lot on the Hungarian events and the Transylvanian events, and he talks a lot about Tököli during these contexts. So we have a picture how he and contemporary sources viewed Tököli at this time period. He mentions Tököli as an honorable person earlier on. He has an honorable descent, but has an unlawful movement because of the Veselényi conspiration. Tököli was branded as a treacherous but a tragic figure. So here we can see a little bit of complexity within Rajko's writings. But overall, he is a negative figure because he went against the rightful monarch, i.e. Leopold I's rulership. He also emphasized Sobieski's importance in the relations between the Christian powers and Tököli. He mentions that how Sobieski basically scolded Tököli's arrogance at a certain point, but overall the Polish and Lithuanian operations were also mentioned in Upper Hungary in the 1680s. So it is important not just in Hungarian, but also in a Polish historian perspective as well. Also, we can see some passages where certain people warn Sobieski that do not trust Tököli because he is of treacherous nature. You cannot trust him, so be very firm with him, and so on and so forth. Now, the Tököli time leaves a very strong heritage, a quite controversial heritage in the later years, because the later movements after the liberation of Hungary will also build upon the heritage of the Tököli movement. And also Francis Rákóczi, the second, was the stepson of Imre Tököli because he was the son of Ilona Zrínyi and Ferenc Rákóczi I, and Tököli married Ilona Zrínyi, therefore he also took care of the young Rákóczi II as well for a time being, so he had personal connections to him. Not very positive personal connections, but personal connections nonetheless. So why it is important in the Rákóczi rebellion to address the Tököli heritage? On one part, the Tököli heritage means an Ottoman alliance and a vassalage. This means that they are the traitors of Christianity and they are the hindrance of the liberation of Hungary. So it's a very detrimental to their cause on an international level. Also, it is very important to say that they had a strong base in Transylvania, but this also damaged the principality's options on the longer terms. And again, the Rákóczi heritage was a bit controversial in Transylvania as well. I'm referring to the catastrophic campaign of George Rákóczi II into Poland and Lithuania, which left an ill taste in certain groups' mouths, even in the Principality of Transylvania as well, because it brought up to them the detrimental casualties that the Ottomans inflicted on the principality itself. So George Rákóczi II is not a positive figure neither in Transylvanian history, neither in Polish history as well. Of course, this also gives a pedigree to Rákóczi as well. He could count on the former officers of Tököli. He could also count on the vast riches of the Rákóczi estates as well. So he could actually build upon a political pedigree at this point. But also this means that the royal court would monitor Rákóczi's every decision and movement. So it is you must be very careful when you go into this type of political play at the early 1700s or late 1600s. Even so, this strong connection meant that Rákóczi wanted to distance himself from Tököli's heritage as much as possible. He denied support for the rebels in 1697 when they asked him to be their leader and support them. He denounced it and even went to Vienna to assure Leopold of his loyalty. Also, he needed conviction or to take the leadership, and he was eventually eventually agreed after his imprisonment and escape from the prison and his fleeing into Poland. He agreed to take the mantle of leader of the new uprising in 1703. So this is the major turning point in his life. Now, again, he wanted to distance himself from Tököli as much as possible. It means that he would not use the term Kuruc officially, meaning that the Kuruc was branded as a sort of anti-Christian Turkish alliance, so he doesn't want to do itself because on a diplomatic level it would be detrimental to him. So in official documents and the leader and the Kuruc officers' documents, you cannot see the Kuruc terminology, but you can see the term malcontents and insurgents used oftenly by the official documents of Rákóczi's state. However, the officers, the soldiers, or the former rebels as well use the Kuruc and in a very popular term. So you had either Kuruc and the not Kuruc ideology present both during the Rákóczi uprising. Now, at the final parts of the Rákóczi rebellion, I need to talk about the Central European connections, because also Rákóczi had his Central European connections. Both Tököli and also both Rákóczi had these types of networks within the region. The Kuruc conflicts themselves are not completely isolated incidents. As I mentioned earlier, I can mention the French connections, I can mention the Ottoman connections, but also the Tartar, the Swedish, the Danish, and the Russian connections as well. But also the Polish connections, Polish-Lithuanian connections are very strong in both cases. We had precedents from the 16th and 17th century, as I mentioned, but also the Upper Hungarian nobility, because they are living very close to the border, they are living in the same area, leaned very close to the Transylvanian and Polish type of mentality and nobility. They have similar military cultures, similar mentalities, similar foes. So immediately we can see this type of closeness and very good understanding between these estates. Certain castles, estates were owned in Polish territory by Hungarian nobilities, such as the Veselényi, Tököli families, and also Rákóczi residences were in Břežany and in Skole, Yaroslav, and in Gdańsk as well. So here we can see also the network of the Central European nobility forming in front of our eyes. Also, we can see the increasing influx of soldiers from Poland in the mid to late 17th century as mercenaries at first, and later on as members of the Christian alliance against the Ottomans. This area also saw an increasing presence of conspirators and Kuruc leaders, because they are basically on the outskirts of the empire, so it is much safer for them to conspire and to organize later rebellions. Also, Poland was important to them in a diplomatic level. Poland was the link to the major foreign powers, so France, Sweden, and to Russia as well, which they tried to use as much as possible. Here we can also mention some of the German princedoms as well. During the Tököli's time, in the late 1670s, we know about 2,000 or 3,000 mercenaries coming from the Polish territory, mostly French and Polish mercenaries, strengthening Tököli's positions. And of course, these were fallback points from Munkács as well, so they also sought refuge in Polish territories when the situation went very sour for the Tököli movement. Rákóczi also had his connections in Poland. Here we can see a mentioning of his memoirs as well. And I quote, "I had neither acquaintance nor friend in Poland. Although through my grandmother, Princess Báthory, I am related to illustrious noble houses, but under the yoke of the Germans it was forbidden and dangerous to maintain friendship with them." End quote. This means the nobilities and family ties that I mentioned earlier as well. Of course, Rákóczi's presence was very interesting in Poland. Not just he had strong Transylvanian positions and Hungarian positions as well. Not only he had claims to maybe the Principality of Transylvania eventually, which he definitely was elected to, but also he had eventually aspirations to the Polish throne as well. And for this political endeavor, he was supported by one of the most powerful people, and definitely the most powerful woman of the time, Elżbieta Helena Sieniawska. Sorry for the pronunciation. But she was a strong supporter and, dare I say, lover of Rákóczi. They had a very interesting and very tumultuous relationship during Rákóczi's rebellion. She financed his endeavors. She also represented him politically in the Polish sphere as well, and she was his basically strong confidant in the Central European affairs, basically up to Rákóczi's exile in the 1710s. Also, in the Polish context, there were plans to mount around 3,000 or 4,000 mercenaries in the earlier year, and they tried to borrow money and try to pawn own estates to Polish nobles to actually have the financial backing, but they only managed to gain around 600 to 800 Polish soldiers, mercenaries by the early 1700s. They started with this low number. When a larger influx of Polish soldiers, Polish-Lithuanian soldiers, were present on the Hungarian frontier, it was only in the later years of the war, when basically the defeat was inevitable for Rákóczi's side. In 1709, around 3,000 soldiers were here with Starosta Jan Grudziński. They were present at the Battle of Romhány in 1710, a very strong defeat for the Kuruc side, but a very strong problem is that they were not paid, so they didn't stay for too long. Not just they suffered a military defeat, but they were not compensated for their services and for their actions. After the Treaty of Szatmár, 1 year later, Poland became part or important because of the refugees and the people in exile. Around 3,000 people went into exile into Poland along with Rákóczi, so Rákóczi's closest supporters and soldiers and whatnot. In the Polish exile, they remained in connection with each other as much as possible. It was significant for a few years, both in numbers and both in political spheres, and they tried to lobby to raise a new army and to restart the uprising. The idea was that if they managed to continue the fight, then when they close the great European conflicts, such as the Great Northern War and the Habsburg War, Spanish War of Succession, then they could reach a better agreement on an international level for the Hungarian case. This is why Rákóczi wanted to keep his movement, his fight on an international level for as long as possible. So this was his main goal, and he tried to do everything as much as possible to do so. This was basically losing ground by 1712, and eventually Rákóczi departs to France. His relations with his mistress also went a little bit sour. It was a bit cold between them, and eventually he wanted to become as close to Louis XIV as much as possible, so he put his emphasis on the French relations rather than the Polish relations. However, people also remained in Poland. So, for example, Stryj and Gdańsk was home for Adam Woy, Rzeszów was home for Bercsényi, Yaroslav was also home for Rákóczi's wife, Charlotte Amalie. Yaritsov was also home for the company of cavaliers, so Rákóczi's highest quality troops as well. So it was a strong Kuruc and Rákóczi presence here in Poland for a couple of years as well. Imperial reports suggest that around 2,000 soldiers are present in Poland, and their size is even growing, and Rákóczi is treated as a prince in Poland. this was a bit over-exaggerated at this time period, as we can see. Most of these people who went into exile either returned home with amnesty or became mercenaries in Poland or in Russia, or went to France or to other parts of Europe and lived their lives as mercenaries and officers in other armies. Around 500 to 600 soldiers went into Russian service, 300 horsemen and 1 infantry company joined the Polish army. But we know about Ottoman and French services as well. And among the Kuruc ranks, so-called Kuruc ranks, I want to mention Adam Javorka, who basically joined everyone at this point. He served a lot of armies, but eventually would serve also Stanisław Leszczyński as a colonel, and later he served under Czartoryski as well. So he also had a Polish service history, not just Ottoman and Russian service history as well. Immediately, we can see the Central European effects of the Kuruc movements and the Rákóczi movement, but also we must mention the multi-ethnic networks, not just focusing on the Polish-Lithuanian connection, but also the other nationalities as well. Moldova and Wallachia were also important because it was a source of mercenaries for the Kuruc movement, for the Tököli period during the 1600s, and also it was a place for the emigration during Rákóczi's wars as well. They also had anti-Ottoman connections at the time period, but also, which is even more important, that Tököli's former colonel, Miklós Orlai, came through these territories with 700 soldiers as well. Of course, these lands served as a fallback position for Rákóczi's Transylvanian troops in 1705 as well, and also a connecting tissue between the Ottoman Empire and Tököli's former officers as well. So Moldova and Wallachia were very important in this case. Hungary and Transylvania is also need to be mentioned because in and of itself, these territories are multi-ethnic territories. You had Hungarians, Slovaks, Romanians, Saxons, Cypsars, Ruthenians serving in these armies. Ruthenians were also referred to as the gens fidelissima, the most loyal people. So who supported Rákóczi up till the bitter end from the beginning. So they are very highly regarded in the sources. Moravia was also inflicted by these Kuruc movements, especially these northern campaigns during the Rákóczi wars as well, by raids and incursions. And also, as I mentioned, southern Poland is very important as basis for mercenaries, places for emigration, and because of the 17th century period, there were also Transylvanian raids onto these territories, so not very positive relations were also recorded in the early modern period. How are these movements remembered within these nationalities is also very interesting to see. Now, these were quite interesting, as I may add. So, for example, we have the Slovak memory here. The Slovaks were at this time referred to as the Tóth in Hungarian. The Tóth is not mentioned as in a negative term, a pejorative term. This is how they were referred to as in Hungarian context in the early modern period. The Slovaks also supported Rákóczi's uprising. So how these certain minorities or these ethnicities joined Rákóczi is because of similar reason as all the other people in Hungary, because either of religious issues, so maybe they are Protestants, either from financial reasons or political reasons because of their dissatisfaction of the wars and the Habsburg government. So these are very strong indicators that they would support Rákóczi, and Rákóczi was very popular within their ranks. We have a lot of poems, songs, plays that live on in the later years as well. In the Slovak context, we can see one of them represented here. We can also see some songs that are sung in both Hungarian and Slovakian, or a certain hybrid, so in Hungarian but with Slovak words and vice versa. Here we can see one that I roughly translated. And I quote, Hungarians and Slovaks, Hungarians and Tots, fear not brothers, great warriors we are, let the Germans see that. So this one comes from the earlier stages of the Rákóczi War. You also had the Cipsers, who also had plays, dramas in honor of Rákóczi's person in the settlement of Rozsnyó. You had the Ruthenians, who had this proverb, so-called Budejak Rákóczi, when Rákóczi comes. It basically means that everything will be settled when the time comes, when Rákóczi comes. We also have folk songs that remained and poems that remained from Ruthenian language and from Ruthenian folklore. One of them is presented here. And I quote, they have torn up Poland, tearing up Hungary, looking upon it like some game. So again, referring to the more global nature, this is why I chose this passage from the Ruthenian folklore. Also, the Romanian support for Rákóczi is very characteristic at this point of the conflict. Romanians were also referred to as Ola. Romanians living in Transylvania were referred to as Ola at this time period. Again, not a negative term. This is how they're referred to as in Hungarian sources generally. The local Romanians joined with 300 men, basically immediately when the Rákóczi uprising started. We also have within the Romanian folklore the stories of Pintia Gligor, or in Hungarian, the Pintia Vitéz, who was a very interesting figure. He definitely existed. He was remembered as a very bold and brave figure, sometimes too bold and too brave, but is a very iconic figure of the Romanian side of the narrative and the folklore. He is also remembered in Romanian and Hungarian folklore as well, so it's an interesting figure. Balázs Demjén, a very young researcher, also dived into this whole Romanian connection. He has very interesting lectures and publications in the matter, so I just want to give a shout out and a mention to his work as well. And of course, we have even also songs and poems from the Romanian context. One of them, again, I tried to translate to English. Hey Rákóczi Bercsényi, wherever you go, so do we, and quote, similar to the Hungarian song as well. In conclusion, what can we say about both the Tököli and the Rákóczi type of movements, the so-called Kuruc movements in the 17th and 18th century? Definitely we can say that these focused on Hungary and Transylvania. That is not up to debate, but it also was not an isolated incident. It had a very strong Central European involvement and Central European footprint. So more or less we can say that all Central Europeans were actually involved or concerned in some way or form, either as combatants or either as people who suffered because of the conflicts and the effects it had onto them. But these people lived through these conflicts, these movements, and they had either a positive or a more negative, more Habsburg loyal sentiment towards this whole matter, or a little bit of both, or neutral. We can also see the connections, the bases which extended into Central European territories, not just stayed in, strictly speaking, Hungarian territories, but can be found, as I mentioned, in modern-day Poland, Ukraine, Romania as well, Slovakia, and also the parts of the Czech Republic as well. This also meant that not just, as I mentioned, it was not just a platform for cultural transfer in a more static basis because of the estates and the nobility living together, but because of the multi-ethnic nature of these forces, of these Kuruc armies, also gave room to a type of cultural transfer, and it can be shown in the local folklore. One of the examples, as I mentioned, that you see both Hungarian and Slovak words within a single song, within a single poem. You can see translations of Rákóczi songs to Romanian, to Hungarian, to any Slavic language. So you can immediately see these types of cultural transfers as well, and it will become a vital part in the cultural memory of these certain nationalities as well. So in this way, we can also interpret these Kuruc movements, not just, as I mentioned, a so-called national movements of Hungary, but also as Central European events that also were important in the lives and history of the people living in and around the Carpathian Basin. And with that, I would like to thank you very much for your patience and your attention. I really hope I could not just give some clarification about the Kuruc movements, introduce you to this history if you were unfamiliar with it, but also I could show a little bit of different interpretation for the Hungarian listeners as well, but also for the international community as well. Thank you very much for your attention once again.